So another overview of some of the new modules that were released recently. As always, all the modules we look at today are available for free, so please consider supporting the developers. Now we start with two new modules from Instruo. Of course, they are also available in hardware. We have the new version of SICE or SIS, right? SICE 2 with a few additional features. And we have also the Oct Expander that gives us access to, for example, unipolar outputs of some of the LFOs. We have all sorts of logic combinations. We have trigger outputs that are derived from some of the LFOs or a few of the LFOs. And we have also digital to analog converter outputs that you can see will give us sorts of sequences that are again derived from the LFOs. Right, so here I have a few examples. I have here Oct. We can add the expander directly from the right-click menu. Add expander. Right, I have here, as my voice, I have Troika, which is basically three VCOs, and I'm using Karn here, which is a mixer to mix the three oscillators. Right, so I can use, for example, again, the lower outputs, which will give us sorts of sequences as pitch information, right? So I can use 1, 2, and 3 and send them to the oscillators, and already we get sequences, pitch sequences, just by quantizing them. And again, we have also trigger outputs that I can use to sample the sequences through the trigger input here on the quantizer. Right, so now only with the triggers we get changes in pitch and we get basically nice chords. Something that's always fun to do with Oct is feedback modulation. So I can take, for example, output 7 here and modulate the rate of Oct. Of course, we can also use Oct now also for modulation. So here, for example, on the first channel on the mixer, we can add panning modulation. So I can use Oct to modulate the panning here of the first channel. And again, we have also unipolar output. So I can use one of them to modulate the level of the second channel. Right, to bring it in and out. And again, I can use another bipolar output from the original Oct to modulate the level of the third channel. Right, so you can see how useful this expander can be. Again, we have unipolar outputs, we have all sorts of logic combinations. Right, we have OR, we have AND. Right, we have triggers, we have sequences. I have here another example. In this case, I'm using the TSL as an LFO, and this is gating the new size here. If I unmute this, right, size is an envelope. It's bringing in here the coin oscillator. Right, and one of the new features here of this new size version is hold mode, right? So now we have trigger, gate, and we have also hold. And now the sustain, right, will be the main control here. The envelope will always sustain. But we can use the CV input here as a slew limiter, right? So if I take it for a second all the way down, instead of gating the envelope, I will send the gates to the CV input of the sustain. And now with the attack and decay, we can add slew to this, right? First of all, I can offset this. And I can also slew this, right, with the attack and with the decay. So we have now a built-in slew limiter on the envelope. And of course, we can also modulate this. So I can use, for example, two more unipolar outputs from the Oct Expander to modulate the attack and decay, and then modulate the slew amount. This just needs a nice bass drone that I have here with another coin, and again, more modulation from Oct and the Oct Expander. The next module is a new wave shaper from the CV Funk collection. It's stereo and polyphonic, and it has also a built-in compressor for the input. It can be quite interesting for things like drums, for example. Here I have just a sine wave, a simple sine wave coming from the VCV VCO, sequenced by the Penta sequencer from the same collection. Right, and now I can use a few LFOs to add some movement to this. So for example, I can modulate the shape. I can modulate the symmetry. And we have also, if I zoom in a bit, we have separate controls for the density for left and right. So we can take a mono signal and turn it into a stereo signal. Right, and of course this has also modulation, so I can modulate the left and right independently. Right, and again, this was just a simple sine wave. We'll add some delay to this. I have here also some drums, right, with a gate sequencer, sequencing a few drum modules from Doc B. Right, and again I can shape them with a wave folder. Right, and here again we have a compressor for the input signal. So I can also compress them a bit. Right, if you have something more dynamic, this can be really nice. Right, I will add some delay to this. And also the original drum signal. I have here also a bass, a kick all, going again through Tatami, through the folder. The next module is from a new developer from Japan. It's a complex oscillator, so it has two oscillators, even an LFO, and different ways of combining everything. So here it's going just through a filter, so it's not too intense all the time. Right, and you can see here, if I zoom in a bit, you can see most of the labels here are in Japanese, but the tooltips are in English. So for example, here we have the volt per octave input, so I can sequence this with the sequencer. Right, and then we have the shape for the primary oscillator tuning, of course, but also the wave shape. And we can select between different shapes here. So for example, sine to pulse, right, or all sorts of different wave shapes. And of course, we can also modulate this. We have here modulation input. Right, so we can also modulate this if we want. There are also different ways of combining the secondary oscillators. So for example, we can crossfade between them. Here we have the compound unit control, or the alpha. Right, so we can crossfade between them. We can take the secondary oscillator maybe an octave down. Right, also here we can set the wave shape. We can go from sine to saw, or we can have the same wave shape as the primary oscillator. Right, and then we have again a few ways of combining them. By default it's crossfading, but we have here phase modulation, or we have ring modulation. Right, we can even have the LFO modulating the alpha here. So by default it's going, the LFO will modulate the pitch of A and B, or just B, or the alpha. And we have a few wave shapes here to choose from. So either we have sine, saw, or square, or we have, no, that's not a sine, that's a triangle, or a sine, a reverse saw, and randomness. Right, we can change this here. You see square up triangle or random down sine. Right, so we can add some modulation to this. I will add for now an envelope here for the filter, make it a bit more plucky, and some delay. Here I have also a bass. In this case it's just droning, so there is no pitch input, but I'm modulating the shape. It's going through a chorus, a filter with some modulation, a delay. Right, so it can be also a nice bass drone. And I have here another voice, which is a few sort of a weird effects voice, right? Modulating the pitch with an LFO. Right, I have here some modulation input. There's also a CV input for this alpha control. The next module is a new simple sequencer from Sequencer. It's a 4-step sequencer, which might look too simple at first, but it's a great sequencer for something like transposition and adding variation in various places of your patch. Right, so here I have one sequence, again a 4-step sequence for pitch, sequencing the VCO unit. And I have here another sequence running with a clock division that I can use to transpose this sequence. I'm using the quantizer also from Sequencer, which has an offset input for transposition. Right, so we can use a 4-step sequence to transpose things and add movement and create something a bit more complex. I have here another example, again just a simple 4-step sequence, right, sequencing in this case the FM operator. And I can use a trigger sequencer to add variation, for example through the reset, right, to reset the sequence externally. I have here a 10-step sequence. Right, so already we get something a bit more complex, and I have here another sequence that I can use to reverse the direction here through the reverse input. Right, so again, even though it's just a 4-step sequence, we can add some variation to this and make it longer. Or add some delay to this. Another thing we can do with this is we can mix sequences. Right, so I have here 3 sequences, each with its own clock division, and I'm mixing them into one stream that will give me an interesting longer sequence, sequencing Horus here from CV Funk. I have here also a bass. I'm using in this case 4 sequences for modulation. The last module I want to show you today is another module from Bastel, the Pizza Oscillator, which is the same format as the Crust module that was released not long ago. Right here I have one set to full voice. In the right-click menu you can change the control destination to envelope VCA mode, and then we can trigger it with the sync input. I have here the Compass sequencer, also from Bastel, also available for free. Right, and then with the control we can change the envelope. And of course we can also modulate this. Right, we have also FM. And of course also this we can modulate. And we have even wave folding. And this also we can modulate. Here I have another full voice. I will use another channel here on the sequencer. Right, in this case I have it set to ring modulation. Right, and again I can modulate this. We can also use external signals as a modulation source. Right here I have drums, and they are going to the external input here on pizza, which will bypass the so-called oct oscillator, which is the original modulation source. You can see this here. So instead of FMing with the oct oscillator, I'm FMing with the drums. Right, this is going through some chorus and a modulated filter. We have also multiple wave outputs that we can use. So here, for example, I'm sequencing another pizza and I'm using the pulse output as my sound source and the main output to modulate the FM index or FM amount at audio rates. This is going through a bandpass filter. I have here also another voice, again another pizza going through Galaxy, a reverb, and after the reverb distortion and a filter, and I'm using the pulse output here to modulate the filter at audio rates. Before I unmute this, please again consider supporting the developers. Thank you for watching. Cheers!